Lost in a lethal Montana blizzard, Jack Harper found himself face to face with a massive white horse whose front leg was hopelessly trapped in deep snow, its desperate eyes locked on his. As he approached the injured giant, its foal did something no wild horse had ever done before. It deliberately placed itself between Jack and its mother, creating a bridge of trust that would challenge everything he thought he knew about these mysterious mountain creatures. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The cold bit through Jack Harper's worn jacket as he trudged through knee-deep snow, cursing his luck and the storm that had trapped him in these unfamiliar woods. 3 days ago, he had been a city boy with dreams of becoming a photographer, capturing nature's raw beauty for magazines. Now, lost in the Montana wilderness after his truck slid off an icy mountain road, he was just trying to survive. Jack adjusted his straw hat, a gift from his late grandfather that he stubbornly wore even in winter, and squinted through the swirling snow. The temperature was dropping fast as evening approached. He needed shelter, and soon. "Just keep moving," he muttered to himself, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. His hands, protected only by thin gloves, had lost feeling hours ago. His boots, stylish but impractical, were soaked through. Each step was becoming more difficult than the last. The wind howled through the tall pines, drowning out all other sounds. Jack had never felt so alone, so insignificant against nature's power. Growing up in Seattle, his experience with wilderness extended to carefully maintained hiking trails and the occasional camping trip in designated areas with amenities. Nothing had prepared him for this. He stumbled over a hidden root and fell face first into the snow. For a moment he lay there, exhaustion washing over him. It would be so easy to just close his eyes, to rest for a while. But somewhere in his mind a warning bell sounded. Sleep meant death in these conditions. With a groan, Jack pushed himself up. As he did, something caught his eye through the trees. A flash of white against white, a movement that seemed deliberate rather than the random sway of branches in the wind. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding small and lost in the vastness of the forest. "Is someone there?" He moved toward the movement, hope giving new strength to his tired legs. As he approached a small clearing, he stopped abruptly, his mouth falling open in awe. Standing before him, nearly blending with the snowy landscape, was the largest horse Jack had ever seen. Its coat was pure white, its mane wild and flowing in the wind. Steam rose from its nostrils as it regarded Jack with wary eyes. One of its front legs was awkwardly positioned as if the animal couldn't put weight on it. "Hey there," Jack said softly, his voice barely audible above the wind. He had almost no experience with horses. His grandfather had owned a small farm, but Jack had always been too intimidated by the large animals to get close. "Are you hurt?" The horse snorted and tossed its head, taking a defensive stance despite its injured leg. It was then that Jack noticed a smaller form, partially hidden behind the massive stallion. A foal, also white, watching him with large, nervous eyes. "You've got a baby," Jack whispered, understanding dawning. The adult horse wasn't just stuck in the snow with an injury. It was protecting its young. The situation suddenly felt more delicate, more dangerous. Jack knew he should probably move on, find shelter elsewhere. Wild horses could be unpredictable, especially injured ones with young to protect. But something in the stallion's eyes held him in place, a depth of intelligence, a silent plea that Jack couldn't ignore. Slowly, he removed his straw hat, thinking the unusual shape might be alarming the horse. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady and calm despite his chattering teeth. "I just want to help." The horse's ears flicked forward, assessing. It didn't retreat further, which Jack took as a positive sign. With exaggerated slowness, he took a step forward, then another. The stallion tensed but remained still. Jack had seen enough wildlife documentaries to know approaching a wild animal head-on could be perceived as a threat. He angled his body slightly away, avoiding direct eye contact while keeping the horse in his peripheral vision. Another step, and another. When he was about 10 feet away, the stallion snorted loudly, pawing at the ground with its good leg. Jack froze. The horse's muscles were bunched, ready to charge despite its injury if Jack came any closer. Okay, Jack said, backing up a step. I'll keep my distance. Looking around, Jack noticed a fallen log nearby, partially sheltered by overhanging branches. It wasn't much, but it would provide some protection from the wind and snow. He moved toward it, making a show of sitting down, trying to communicate that he wasn't a threat. From his new position, he could better assess the situation. The horse's leg didn't appear to be broken, but it was favoring it heavily. Perhaps it had stepped into a hidden hole in the snow, twisting its ankle. The foal seemed uninjured but nervous, staying close to its parent. Jack's own situation was dire enough, lost, cold, with limited supplies. Now he was faced with an injured wild horse and its foal. The sensible thing would be to focus on his own survival. But as darkness began to fall and the temperature plummeted further, he couldn't bring himself to abandon them. Using the small knife from his pocket, Jack cut branches from nearby pines, creating a rudimentary shelter around the fallen log. He worked methodically, focusing on the task to keep his mind off the cold. Occasionally he glanced at the horses. The stallion watched him warily but made no move to flee, perhaps understanding on some level that it needed help, or perhaps simply too injured to go far in the deep snow. Once the shelter was as good as he could make it, Jack dug through his backpack. His supplies were limited: a half-empty water bottle, a protein bar, a small first aid kit, his camera equipment, and a lighter. No cell phone service, of course. The first aid kit contained little that would help a horse: some bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relievers meant for humans. But there was a thermal blanket, the kind that looked like aluminum foil. It wouldn't cover a horse, but it might help Jack survive the night. As darkness fell completely, Jack huddled in his makeshift shelter, wrapped in the thermal blanket. The cold seemed to seep into his very bones. From his position, he could still see the white horses, now ghostly shapes in the moonlight that filtered through the clouds. "We'll figure this out in the morning," he said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the horses or himself. Throughout the night, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, fighting to stay awake, knowing that succumbing to sleep in such cold could be fatal. Each time he opened his eyes, he looked for the horses, confirming they were still there. The stallion remained standing, a sentinel in the night, while the foal had bedded down in the snow beside it. By dawn, the snowfall had stopped, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. Jack emerged from his shelter, stiff and shivering but alive. His first concern was for the horses. The stallion still stood in the same spot, its injured leg held carefully off the ground. The foal was awake, nuzzling at the snow as if searching for something to eat. As Jack watched, the foal looked up at him, then back at its parent, then started moving. Not away from Jack, as he expected, but toward him. Jack held his breath as the foal approached, its delicate hooves creating small impressions in the pristine snow. The adult horse snorted in alarm, shifting its weight as if preparing to intervene despite its injury. Jack remained perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement might spook either animal. The foal paused about 5 feet away, its breath visible in the cold morning air. It was smaller than Jack had initially thought, perhaps only a few months old, with legs that seemed too long for its body. Its coat wasn't purely white like its parents'. There were subtle dapples of gray across its haunches, barely visible against the snow. "Hey there, little one," Jack whispered, keeping his voice low and gentle. The foal's ears pricked forward, curious rather than afraid. Behind it, the adult horse nickered softly, a sound that seemed to be both a warning to the foal and a threat to Jack. But the foal didn't retreat. Instead, it stretched its neck forward, nostrils flaring as it caught Jack's unfamiliar scent. Slowly, moving as if through water, Jack extended his hand, palm up and open. He had no food to offer, nothing to entice the young horse, just a gesture of peace. The foal hesitated, then took another step forward. "That's it," Jack encouraged. "I'm not going to hurt you." The moment was broken by a sharp whinny from the adult horse. The foal startled, backing up several paces before turning to rejoin its parent. Jack let his hand fall, disappointed but understanding. Trust would take time he wasn't sure they had given the dangerous cold and his own dwindling supplies. Standing up carefully, Jack assessed his surroundings in the daylight. The clearing was surrounded by dense pine forest, the trees heavy with snow. There was no clear path, no obvious way out. The sky above was gray and threatening, suggesting more snow might be on the way. Jack needed to find civilization and fast, but first, he needed to address the immediate problem, the injured horse and its dependent foal. If he left them here, they might not survive. The adult horse couldn't move properly to find food or escape predators, and the foal was too young to fend for itself. Jack had never considered himself an animal person. Growing up in the city, his experience with wildlife was limited to squirrels in the park and the occasional raccoon rummaging through garbage. But something about these horses, their vulnerability juxtaposed with their wild beauty, stirred something protective in him. "I can't just leave you here," he said aloud. Rummaging through his backpack again, Jack found his map. He had marked his original route before setting out, planning to photograph several scenic locations mentioned in his guidebook. If he could determine where he was now, perhaps he could find the nearest ranger station or outpost where he could get help for both himself and the horses. But after studying the map for several minutes, Jack had to admit he was thoroughly lost. The storm had disoriented him, and nothing in the surrounding landscape matched the marked trails on his map. Glancing back at the horses, Jack made a decision. He would try to help the injured horse first, then figure out their next move. It was risky. Approaching an injured wild animal was never advised, but he couldn't see another option. From his first aid kit, Jack took out the roll of bandage and a small tube of antibiotic ointment. It wasn't much, but it might help if the horse had an open wound. The bigger challenge would be getting close enough to examine the injury without getting kicked or trampled. "Okay," he said to himself, putting his hat back on. Slow and steady. He approached from the side, avoiding the horse's blind spot directly in front or behind. The massive animal watched him, muscles tense but not moving away. The foal had positioned itself on the other side of its parent, peering at Jack with evident curiosity. "I just want to look at your leg," Jack explained, knowing the horse couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might be soothing. "I might be able to help." When he was about 6 feet away, the horse shifted, raising its head high, a warning. Jack stopped. This close, he could see the horse was even larger than he'd initially thought, easily standing over 16 hands high. Its injured leg was held awkwardly, the hoof barely touching the ground. "I need to get closer," Jack murmured. "Just a little bit." The standoff continued for several minutes, Jack inching forward, the horse growing increasingly agitated. Finally, Jack had to accept that this approach wasn't working. The horse was too wild, too wary to allow a stranger near its injury. Discouraged, Jack retreated to his makeshift shelter. He needed a new plan. As he sat considering his options, the foal once again broke away from its parent and began approaching him. This time it moved with more confidence, less hesitation in its steps. Jack remained still, hardly daring to breathe as the young horse came within arm's reach. It stretched its neck, sniffing at Jack's hat, then his shoulder. Jack could feel the warmth of its breath, see the long eyelashes framing its curious eyes. "Well, hello again," he said softly. The foal didn't flinch at his voice this time. Instead, it moved even closer, its soft muzzle touching Jack's hand. The contact was electric, a moment of connection across species that Jack had never experienced before. The foal's trust, however tentative, felt like a gift. From the edge of the clearing, the adult horse watched this interaction with what Jack could only interpret as nervous concern. It made soft, nickering sounds, clearly communicating with its offspring, but remarkably, the foal didn't retreat. It seemed to be assessing Jack, deciding whether he represented a threat or potential help. An idea began to form in Jack's mind. If he couldn't approach the injured horse directly, perhaps he could gain its trust through the foal. It wasn't ideal. Using a baby animal as an intermediary felt somewhat manipulative, but it might be their only chance. "Your parent needs help," Jack told the foal, keeping his voice gentle, "and I think you know that." As if understanding, the foal turned its head to look back at the adult horse, then to Jack again. It took a step backward, then stopped, watching Jack expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Jack asked, hardly believing what seemed to be happening. The foal took another step back, still watching him. Jack stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The adult horse tensed but didn't intervene as Jack began to follow the foal, maintaining a respectful distance. Leading him on a circuitous route, the foal approached the adult horse from an angle that seemed less threatening. It stopped about 10 feet away from its parent, looking back at Jack as if to say, "This is as far as you go." Jack understood. He knelt in the snow, making himself smaller, less intimidating. From this position, he could see the adult horse's injured leg more clearly. There was no visible blood or protruding bone, a good sign, but the leg was swollen around the fetlock, suggesting a sprain or strain. "You've twisted your ankle, haven't you?" and Jack said, "That's why you can't leave. That's why." The horse regarded him warily, but there was something different in its gaze now, a tentative assessment rather than outright fear. The presence of the foal between them seemed to have changed the dynamic. Jack knew what he needed to do, though it went against every wilderness survival guide he'd ever read. He needed to help these horses, and to do that, he needed supplies he didn't have, which meant he needed to find help, fast. Standing slowly, Jack knew he faced an impossible choice. He couldn't abandon the horses, but staying meant risking his own life as his supplies dwindled. The rational decision would be to save himself, find help, and then return for the horses if possible. But something told him that if he left now, he might never find this clearing again in the vast wilderness. "I'm going to look for help," he announced to the horses, feeling slightly foolish for talking to them, but needing to vocalize his thoughts. "But first, I need to do what I can for you. The adult horse watched him warily as Jack returned to his backpack and pulled out his water bottle. He had less than half left, precious little in these conditions, but the horse needed it more than he did. Finding a relatively flat rock, Jack poured some water into the shallow depression on its surface, creating a makeshift drinking bowl. He placed it on the ground and backed away. The foal approached first, sniffing curiously before taking a tentative lick. The adult horse remained where it was, clearly unwilling to put weight on its injured leg. "Come on," Jack encouraged. "You need to drink." After watching the foal for several minutes, the adult horse finally began moving, limping painfully through the snow. Jack held his breath, staying perfectly still as the massive animal approached the water. It sniffed cautiously, then began to drink, finishing the small amount in seconds. "That's all I have," Jack said apologetically. "I need to find more for all of us." Looking around the clearing more carefully, Jack noticed something he'd missed before, a slight depression in the snow that might indicate a stream beneath. If he was lucky, it wouldn't be completely frozen over. Using a fallen branch as a makeshift shovel, Jack began digging through the snow. After several minutes of effort, his improvised tool struck something solid. Not ice, but wood. Digging with renewed vigor, Jack uncovered what appeared to be an old, half-rotted log that had fallen across a narrow stream. The water beneath was moving fast enough to resist freezing completely. "Thank God," Jack muttered, clearing away more snow until he had exposed about 3 feet of running water. The horses had been watching his efforts with interest. Now, as Jack stepped back, the foal approached the newly revealed stream, the adult horse following cautiously behind. Both drank deeply, the sound of their satisfaction audible in the quiet forest. While they were distracted, Jack took the opportunity to examine his surroundings more carefully. The clearing was in a slight valley, with gentle slopes rising on 3 sides. If he climbed one of those slopes, he might get a better view of the area, possibly spot signs of civilization. The north-facing slope seemed the least steep. Jack began making his way up, his boots slipping on the snow-covered ground. Each step was an effort, his muscles protesting after the long, cold night, but he pushed on, determined to reach the top. When he finally crested the ridge, Jack was breathing hard, his lungs burning from the cold air. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon in all directions. Trees, endless trees, their branches heavy with snow. No roads, no smoke from chimneys, no power lines, nothing to indicate human presence. But wait, there to the east was something different. A break in the tree line too straight to be natural. A road, perhaps, or a fire break. Whatever it was, it represented his best chance of finding help. Jack memorized the direction, using a distinctive lightning-struck tree as his marker. Then he made his way carefully back down the slope to the clearing where the horses waited. The foal had bedded down in the snow near the stream, while the adult horse remained standing, its injured legs still held carefully off the ground. As Jack approached, the foal raised its head, regarding him with what seemed like recognition. "I think I found a way out," Jack told them, sitting down on a fallen log to rest. "There's something to the east that might be a road. If I can reach it, I might find help." The question was whether to go now or wait until morning. The day was already half gone, and in these mountains darkness would come early. Traveling through the forest at night would be dangerous, possibly fatal if he lost his way. But waiting meant another night in the brutal cold with minimal shelter. As Jack deliberated, the foal rose and approached him again, this time with even less hesitation than before. It came right up to him, its soft muzzle exploring his jacket pockets as if searching for treats. "Sorry, buddy," Jack said with a small laugh. "I don't have anything for you." The foal snorted softly, then to Jack's astonishment, folded its legs and settled down in the snow right beside him. The trust implicit in this action left Jack speechless. He glanced at the adult horse, expecting an objection, but it merely watched, its ears forward with interest rather than laid back in threat. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Jack reached out and touched the foal's neck. Its coat was thick and surprisingly warm. The foal didn't flinch or move away. If anything, it seemed to lean slightly into Jack's touch. "Well," Jack murmured, "I guess that settles it. We're staying together tonight, and I'll head out in the morning." The decision made, Jack turned his attention to improving their shelter. He gathered more branches, creating a more substantial windbreak around the fallen log. Using his knife, he stripped bark from several trees, ignoring the guilt he felt at damaging living wood. Survival took precedence over environmental concerns at this point. The bark, layered and partially sheltered from the snow, would provide a drier place to sit than directly on the fallen log. Jack arranged his makeshift seat, then set about gathering more branches to create a small fire. His lighter was nearly empty, but it might be enough to ignite some dry inner bark if he could find it. As the daylight began to fade, Jack finally managed to start a small fire using bark from a fallen pine and carefully shielding the tiny flame from the wind with his body until it caught. The fire was small. He didn't have enough fuel to make it larger, but it provided a precious circle of warmth. The horses watched his efforts with evident curiosity. The adult had moved closer to the stream, where it could drink without moving far, while the foal alternated between staying near its parent and approaching Jack, seemingly torn between two sources of security. As darkness fell, Jack huddled by his small fire, wrapped in his thermal blanket. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the clear sky after the storm allowing heat to escape into the night. His small fire would not last long. He had neither the energy nor the resources to maintain it through the night. To his surprise, as the fire began to die down, the foal approached again. This time, it didn't stop at a respectful distance, but came right up to Jack and lay down beside him, its body providing a windbreak and, more importantly, warmth. Jack froze, unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. The adult horse nickered softly but made no move to call its foal away. After a moment's hesitation, Jack carefully leaned against the young horse's side, feeling its steady breathing, its incredible heat radiating through his thin jacket. "Thank you," he whispered, overcome with gratitude for this wild creature's trust. As the night deepened and the stars emerged in the clear sky, Jack found himself in an impossible situation that had somehow turned into something miraculous. Lost in the wilderness, he had found connection with one of nature's most magnificent creatures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the difficult journey to find help, the uncertainty of the adult horse's injury. But for now, in this moment, there was a kind of peace. Jack woke to the gentle nudging of something against his shoulder. Opening his eyes, he found himself staring into the large, liquid eyes of the foal, its breath creating small clouds in the frigid morning air. For a moment, Jack was disoriented, the events of the previous day rushing back as he became aware of the biting cold and his stiff, aching muscles. "Good morning to you too," he said, his voice hoarse. The foal nickered softly, stepping back as Jack slowly sat up. During the night, snow had dusted his thermal blanket, but the foal's body had provided enough warmth to keep him from freezing. The adult horse stood nearby, watching them with what Jack now recognized as cautious acceptance rather than alarm. Jack checked his watch, 6:30 a.m. The sky was lightening, though the sun had yet to rise above the mountain peaks. He needed to get moving if he wanted to make it to the potential road he'd spotted yesterday. Standing gingerly, Jack stretched his sore limbs and took stock of his situation. His hunger was a constant ache now. His water gone. The protein bar in his pack was his only food, and he'd been saving it for when his energy was lowest. That time had come. Jack unwrapped the bar and broke it in half, figuring he'd eat one portion now and save the rest for later. As he raised it to his mouth, the foal approached again, its nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. "Sorry, this isn't for horses," Jack said, taking a bite. The sweetness exploded on his tongue, his body craving the calories. The foal watched him eat with such intensity that Jack almost laughed. "Fine, you can have a tiny bit," he relented, breaking off a small piece. He held it out on his palm, and to his surprise, the foal delicately took it, chewing thoughtfully before seeming to decide it wasn't particularly appealing. "Not a fan of chocolate and peanut butter, huh?" Jack said, finishing his portion and carefully wrapping the remainder. He took a final drink from the stream, filled his water bottle, and began gathering his few belongings. The prospect of leaving the horses troubled him deeply. The adult was clearly unable to travel far with its injury, and the foal shouldn't leave its parent. "I have to find help," Jack explained, feeling the need to justify his departure. "I'll come back for you, I promise." The adult horse regarded him steadily, its gaze unreadable. The foal, however, seemed agitated, pacing back and forth between Jack and its parent. As Jack shouldered his backpack and turned to leave, Following his mental map toward where he believed the road might be, he heard the soft crunch of snow behind him. Turning, he found the foal following, its ears pricked forward inquisitively. "No, you need to stay with your mom," Jack said, gesturing back toward the adult horse. The foal stopped, looking back at its parent, then at Jack again. It pawed at the snow with one hoof, seemingly conflicted. Jack continued walking, hoping the foal would return to its parent. But after a few more steps, he heard the snow crunching behind him again. The foal was still following, now at a trot to catch up. "Hey, seriously," Jack said, stopping again. "You can't come with me." The adult horse nickered loudly from the clearing, a sound that seemed like a command. The foal's ears swiveled back, listening, but it didn't return. Instead, to Jack's astonishment, it moved closer to him, standing so near that Jack could feel its warmth. Jack looked back at the injured horse, then at the foal beside him, completely baffled by this turn of events. Why would the foal choose to follow him instead of staying with its parent? And why wasn't the adult horse more agitated by this development? It was almost as if the adult horse was allowing it. The thought seemed absurd, yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening here, some kind of communication or understanding beyond his comprehension. "Do you want to come with me?" Jack asked, feeling slightly ridiculous for asking. The foal bumped its head against Jack's arm, then took a few steps in the direction Jack had been heading, looking back expectantly. "This is crazy," Jack muttered, but he began walking again, the foal keeping pace beside him. They moved through the forest together, an unlikely pair navigating the deep snow. Jack set a steady pace, conscious of the foal's shorter legs and the difficult terrain. Occasionally, the young horse would range ahead, seeming to pick out the easiest path through the snow, then wait for Jack to catch up. After about an hour of walking, Jack began to worry. The foal had voluntarily left its parent to accompany him, which seemed completely counter to natural behavior. Was the adult horse more severely injured than he'd thought? Was the foal seeking help in the only way it could? The thought spurred Jack to move faster, despite his exhaustion. If the foal was somehow trying to lead him to help for its parent, he couldn't let it down. The forest began to thin as they approached the area where Jack had seen the break in the trees. His heart raced with anticipation, and then sank as he realized what he was looking at. It wasn't a road at all, but a wide, frozen river, its icy surface creating the straight line he'd mistaken for a human-made path. "Damn it," Jack said, stopping at the river's edge. The foal came up beside him, sniffing at the ice curiously. The river presented both a problem and an opportunity. Rivers often led to towns or settlements, but following this one would take him away from the injured horse. And crossing it would be dangerous. The ice might not be thick enough to support his weight. As Jack deliberated, the foal stepped cautiously onto the ice. It tested the surface with one hoof, then another, before committing to walking on the frozen river. It moved a few yards out, then turned, looking back at Jack, with what he could only interpret as encouragement. "You want me to follow you across?" Jack asked. The foal pawed at the ice, creating a sharp, hollow sound that echoed through the silent forest. Trusting the foal's lighter weight and natural instincts, Jack carefully stepped onto the ice. It creaked slightly, but held firm. Moving with exaggerated slowness, he began to cross, following the path the foal had taken. Halfway across, a loud crack split the air. Jack froze, his heart in his throat. The ice beneath him held, but a spiderweb of fractures spread outward from where he stood. The foal, already on the far bank, whinnied in alarm. Jack remained perfectly still, afraid that any movement might send him plunging into the freezing water below. Falling through the ice would mean certain death. He wouldn't survive more than a few minutes in water that cold. Taking a deep breath, Jack assessed his options. The far bank was closer than the one behind him. Moving with painful slowness, he began to distribute his weight as evenly as possible, sliding his feet rather than lifting them, inch by excruciating inch. Another crack, another moment of paralyzing fear. The foal paced anxiously on the bank, whinnying in what seemed like encouragement or distress. "I'm trying," Jack muttered through gritted teeth, continuing his agonizingly slow progress. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jack's feet found solid ground. He scrambled up the bank, collapsing in the snow, his heart hammering in his chest. The foal came to him immediately, nudging his face with its soft muzzle. "Thanks for the moral support," Jack said, reaching up to stroke its neck with a shaking hand. Now that they had crossed the river, Jack wasn't sure which direction to take. Both upstream and downstream stretched into the distance, with no obvious signs of civilization in either direction. The sun was higher now, providing some warmth but also making the snow blindingly bright. Jack stood up, brushing snow from his clothes as he studied the river banks in both directions. Rivers typically flowed towards civilization, but which way was downstream? The surface was frozen smooth, offering no obvious clues about the water's natural direction. He glanced at the sun, orienting himself. If the river ran roughly east-west, and they had crossed from the north, then following it east might eventually lead to lower elevations where settlements were more likely. It was his best guess with limited information. "East it is," Jack said to the foal, who had been watching him with apparent interest. "Assuming I've got my bearings right." They set off along the riverbank, Jack's boots crunching through the snow while the foal moved with surprising grace beside him. Every few minutes, Jack would look back across the river, memorizing landmarks to ensure he could find his way back to the injured horse. The thought of failing to return with help weighed heavily on him. As they walked, Jack studied the young horse more carefully. Its coat wasn't pure white as he'd initially thought, but had subtle dappling that would likely become more pronounced as it matured. Its mane and tail were thick but relatively short. They'd grow longer with age. Jack guessed the foal was female, though he wasn't entirely confident in his ability to determine a young horse's sex. "I should probably call you something," Jack said, breaking the silence. "How about Ghost? Too obvious?" The foal's ears flicked toward him at the sound of his voice. "Maybe Spirit? No, that's from that movie." He thought for a moment. "What about Willow? You're delicate but stronger than you look, like a willow branch." The foal nudged his arm with its muzzle, which Jack chose to interpret as approval. "Willow it is, then." They continued for nearly 2 hours, the terrain gradually becoming less steep as the river valley widened. Jack's strength was flagging, hunger and exhaustion taking their toll. He paused to eat the remaining half of his protein bar, savoring each small bite. Willow watched but didn't approach for a taste this time. The sky had clouded over again, the temperature dropping as the promise of morning warmth faded. Jack pulled his jacket tighter, wishing he had proper winter gear. His city clothes weren't designed for extended exposure to these conditions. "We need to find help soon," he told Willow, his breath forming thick clouds. "For all our sakes." As if in response, Willow suddenly lifted her head, ears pricked forward. She stared intently downstream, her posture alert. Jack followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just more trees, more snow, more river. "What is it? Do you see something?" Willow pawed at the ground, then began walking purposefully downstream. Jack followed, trusting the foal's senses more than his own at this point. They moved faster now, Willow occasionally breaking into a trot before slowing to allow Jack to catch up. After another half hour, Jack heard it, the distant sound of an engine, faint but unmistakably human-made. Hope surged through him, giving new energy to his tired legs. "You heard that before I didn't you?" he said to Willow, who continued forward with determination. The sound grew louder as they rounded a bend in the river. Jack's heart leaped when he spotted what appeared to be a wooden structure through the trees on the opposite bank, a cabin or small house with smoke rising from a chimney. "Hello!" Jack shouted, waving his arms. "Help, over here!" His voice seemed swallowed by the vastness of the forest, but then the engine sound changed pitch like someone had throttled down. A moment later, a figure on a snowmobile appeared from behind the cabin, pausing on the far bank. "Help!" Jack called again, jumping and waving. The snowmobile turned toward the river, the driver assessing the ice. After a moment's hesitation, they accelerated across, the machine bouncing slightly on the frozen surface. Jack held his breath, relieved when the snowmobile reached their side safely. The driver cut the engine and removed their helmet, revealing a weathered face beneath a wool hat. A woman, perhaps in her 60s, with deep lines around her eyes and silver-streaked dark hair. "Well, you're about the last thing I expected to find out here," she said, her voice gruff, but not unfriendly. Her eyes moved from Jack to Willow, widening slightly. "And with a foal, no less. You're full of surprises, aren't you?" "Thank God," Jack said, nearly dizzy with relief. "I got lost in the storm. My truck slid off the road up in the pass 2 days ago. I've been stranded out here with—" He stopped, realizing how unlikely his story would sound. "Look, there's an injured horse back across the river. I think it's this foal's mother. She can't walk properly, and I couldn't leave her there to die." The woman studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Willow, who stood calmly beside Jack, showing no fear of either the stranger or the snowmobile. "That's a wild mountain horse," she said finally. "They don't take to people easily, yet this one's following you like a puppy." "I know it's strange," Jack admitted, "but the mother is hurt, and somehow this little one decided to trust me. Can you help us, please?" The woman sighed, pulling off her gloves and extending a hand. "Martha Blackwood, that's my cabin across the way." "Jack Harper," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was strong, her skin calloused from work. "Well, Jack Harper, you look half frozen and probably haven't eaten properly in days. Let's get you warmed up and fed, then we can figure out what to do about your horse situation. But the mother horse won't be going anywhere with an injury," Martha finished for him. "Another hour won't make a difference. Trust me, I've lived with these mountains and their creatures for 30 years. Now, can you ride?" She patted the snowmobile. Jack nodded, though he'd never been on one before. "Good. Hop on behind me. Your little friend can follow us across. The ice is plenty thick here, been crossing it all winter." Jack hesitated, looking at Willow. "Will she follow?" Martha studied the foal. "She's followed you this far. Must have her reasons." Jack climbed onto the snowmobile behind Martha and she started the engine. Willow backed up a few steps at the noise but didn't flee. Martha drove slowly across the river, Jack looking back constantly to ensure Willow was following. The foal picked her way carefully across the ice, maintaining a safe distance from the machine but clearly intent on staying with Jack. When they reached the other side, Martha drove up a gentle slope to the cabin. It was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a substantial log structure with a covered porch and several outbuildings nearby. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the stone chimney, promising warmth inside. As Jack dismounted, his legs nearly buckled beneath him, the cumulative exhaustion of the past days catching up now that rescue seemed at hand. Martha steadied him with a surprisingly strong grip. "Easy there. Let's get you inside." "What about Willow?" Jack asked, looking back at the foal who had stopped at the edge of the cleared area around the cabin. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Willow, is it? Well, she's welcome to the hay and the lean-to out back. I keep some for the deer when the snow gets deep." She studied the foal with a thoughtful expression. "Never seen one of the mountain horses get this close to human dwellings voluntarily. They're usually ghost-like, seen at a distance if at all." As they spoke, Willow took a few tentative steps closer, her curiosity seemingly overcoming her wariness. "She's something special," Jack said quietly. Martha nodded. "That she is. Come on inside now, before you collapse in my yard. We've got planning to do if we're going to help that mama horse." The interior of Martha's cabin was warm and lived in, with sturdy wooden furniture, hand-woven rugs, and walls lined with bookshelves. A wood stove radiated heat from one corner, and the scent of something savory made Jack's empty stomach clench painfully. "Sit," Martha commanded, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "You look ready to drop." Jack sank gratefully into the chair while Martha ladled thick stew from a pot hanging over the stove into a bowl. She placed it before him with a chunk of homemade bread and a glass of water. "Eat slowly," she advised. "Your stomach won't be used to food after going without." Jack nodded, forcing himself to take small bites, despite wanting to devour everything in seconds. The stew was rich with venison, potatoes, and wild mushrooms, the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted, or at least that's how it seemed in his famished state. While he ate, Martha moved to the window, looking out at Willow, who had cautiously approached a covered lean-to structure behind the cabin. "She found the hay," Martha said with a note of approval. "Smart little thing." Between careful bites, Jack explained his situation in greater detail: his photography trip, getting lost in the storm, finding the injured horse and her foal. "The mother can't put weight on her front leg," Jack explained. "I think it's her ankle, the fetlock. It's swollen, but not bleeding or broken as far as I could tell." Martha nodded. "Probably a sprain. Usually heals well enough if they can rest it, but wild horses don't get that luxury unless they're lucky. Predators don't wait for injuries to heal." "Are there wolves around here?" Jack asked, feeling a fresh wave of concern for the horse he'd left behind. "Wolves, mountain lions," Martha confirmed, "though they'd think twice before taking on a full-grown mountain horse. Those horses aren't like domestic breeds. They're tougher, wilder. Been up in these mountains for generations, descended from escaped ranch stock mixed with mustangs that migrated north decades ago." She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from Jack. "These mountain horses are special. They keep to themselves, rarely seen except at a distance. Some folks around here consider them almost mythical. Ghost horses, they call them, especially the white ones." Jack thought of the injured mare's gleaming coat against the snow. The mother is completely white. The foal has some dappling. Martha's eyes narrowed with interest. "A white mare? Those are rare even among the mountain herds. Folks who claim to have spotted them say they bring good fortune." She gave a short laugh. "I'm not one for superstition, but I will say this. You're lucky to be alive after 2 nights in that storm, and even luckier that Foal took a shine to you." Jack finished his stew, feeling strength returning to his body. "So, how do we help the mother? Can we bring her here somehow?" Martha drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. "I've got a stock trailer. It's small, meant for a couple of calves, but it would fit a horse if we can get her into it. The challenge will be reaching her and convincing her to load. Wild horses don't exactly line up to enter confined spaces with humans." "Willow might help," Jack suggested. "The mother seems to trust her judgment, which is why I think she let Willow come with me in the first place." Martha regarded him with a skeptical expression. "You really believe that? That the mare deliberately let her foal go with you to find help?" Jack shrugged, aware of how it sounded. "I know it seems far-fetched, but you didn't see how they interacted. The mare could have called Willow back, but she didn't. She watched us leave like she understood." Martha said noncommittally. "Animals are smarter than most people give them credit for, that's certain. Either way, we'll need to act quickly. Storm's brewing again. I can feel it in my knees. We've got maybe 6 hours before it hits." She stood, moving to a chest near the door, where she began pulling out heavy winter gear. "You'll need these," Your city clothes would get you killed out there in a real Montana blizzard." Jack accepted the offered items gratefully: a thick wool sweater, insulated pants that would fit over his jeans, proper winter boots, and a heavy coat. "These were my sons," Martha said, her voice softening slightly. "He moved to California years ago. Says he doesn't miss the cold." There was a hint of something in her tone, disappointment perhaps, or longing. While Jack changed, Martha gathered supplies, first aid materials for the horse, ropes, blankets, and food. She worked with practiced efficiency, clearly accustomed to preparing for wilderness emergencies. "I'll hitch the trailer to the UTV," she said. "It can handle the snow better than a truck for where we're going. We'll get as close as we can, then go the rest of the way on foot." Jack emerged from the bathroom wearing the warmer clothes, already feeling more prepared for the challenge ahead. Martha handed him a heavy backpack. "Basic supplies," she explained, "in case we get separated or the weather turns faster than expected. Always be prepared in these mountains." They stepped outside into the cold air. Willow was still at the lean-to, contentedly eating hay. When she saw Jack, she lifted her head and nickered softly. "She really has bonded with you," Martha observed, heading toward a large garage-like structure. "That's unusual, especially for a foal that young. They typically stay extremely close to their mothers." "Maybe she knows her mother needs help," Jack suggested, adjusting his new hat, a proper winter cap rather than his grandfather's straw hat which now hung from his backpack. Martha didn't reply, but her expression was thoughtful as she opened the garage doors, revealing a rugged utility vehicle with tracks instead of wheels, designed specifically for snow travel. Behind it sat a small stock trailer, just large enough for a single horse. As Martha hitched the trailer to the UTV, Jack approached Willow, who immediately came to him, sniffing at his new clothes with interest. "We're going to help your mom," he told her softly, stroking her neck. "I need you to show us the way back, okay?" Martha emerged from the garage carrying a coil of rope and what looked like horse tack. "If we're going to load an injured wild horse, we'll need these. I've worked with Mustangs before, not these mountain horses specifically, but the principles are similar." "Will she let you near her?" Jack asked. "Probably not," Martha admitted, "but she might let you with the foal's help. Animals can sense when humans are trying to help sometimes. Not always, but sometimes." She paused, looking at Willow, who stood calmly beside Jack. "Either way, we need to try. A mare with a foal deserves our help, wild or not." Jack nodded, grateful for Martha's willingness to assist despite the risks and complications. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this alone." "Don't thank me yet," Martha warned, checking the sky. "We've still got to find her, convince her to trust us, load her into a trailer, and get back before the storm hits. And that's assuming predators haven't found her first." The gravity of her words settled over Jack. He'd been so focused on finding help that he hadn't fully considered all the challenges still ahead. But looking at Willow, at the trust this wild creature had placed in him, he felt a determination unlike anything he'd experienced before. "We should get going then," Jack said, more confident than he felt. Martha nodded, impressed by his resolve. "One more thing you should know about these mountain horses," she said, as she finished securing the trailer. "They've survived up here for generations because they're smart and they stick together. They have their own way of communicating, their own bonds. Don't underestimate them." The UTV's engine growled as Martha navigated through the snow-covered terrain, the small stock trailer bouncing behind them. Jack sat in the passenger seat, his eyes constantly checking on Willow, who ran alongside them, her white coat almost disappearing against the snowy backdrop. Despite the vehicle's speed, the young horse kept pace with remarkable endurance. "She's strong," Martha commented, noticing Jack's concern. "These mountain horses develop stamina early. They have to survive up here." They reached the frozen river, and Martha slowed, studying the ice. "We'll cross here," she decided. "The ice is thickest at this bend." The crossing went smoothly, the UTV's tracks providing good traction on the slippery surface. Willow followed, picking her way across with the same careful steps she'd used earlier with Jack. Once across, Jack pointed toward the ridge he'd descended the previous day. "We need to go that way. There's a clearing on the other side where her mother is stranded." Martha nodded, turning the vehicle in the direction he indicated. The terrain became steeper, forcing her to navigate carefully around trees and boulders. Eventually, the forest grew too dense for the UTV and trailer. "This is as far as we can go with the vehicle," Martha said, cutting the engine. "We'll have to continue on foot and come back for it once we've found the mare." They gathered essential supplies from the UTV: ropes, the first aid kit for horses, and emergency provisions. Jack looked at Willow, who had stopped a few yards ahead and was looking back at them expectantly. "I think she wants us to follow her," Jack said. Martha shouldered her pack. "Lead on, then." Willow seemed to understand, turning and picking a path through the trees that avoided the deepest snowdrifts. Jack and Martha followed, the older woman moving with surprising agility despite her age. "How long have you lived out here?" Jack asked as they hiked. 32 years, Martha replied. "Moved here with my husband after we got married. He passed 15 years ago. Heart attack while chopping wood." Her tone was matter-of-fact, the grief long since weathered into a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. "Considered moving back to civilization, but this is home now. And you've seen these mountain horses before?" Martha nodded. "Glimpses mostly. They're elusive, almost ghostly in how they appear and disappear. The locals have all kinds of stories about them. Some say they're descendants of cavalry horses that escaped during the Indian Wars. Others claim they've been here since before settlers arrived." She paused to catch her breath. "Whatever their origin, they're special. Stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than regular domestic horses. They survive winters that would kill most livestock, and they're fiercely protective of their own." Jack thought about the injured mare, allowing her foal to go with him. "Yet the mother let Willow come with me." "That's what makes this so unusual," Martha agreed. "In all my years here, I've never heard of one of these horses willingly approaching humans, let alone a foal separating from its mother to follow one." They continued in silence for a while, the only sounds their breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. The sky had darkened further, the approaching storm painting the clouds in ominous shades of gray. After about 40 minutes of hiking, Willow suddenly picked up her pace, disappearing over a small rise. Jack hurried after her, his heart pounding with both exertion and anticipation. As he crested the rise, the clearing came into view, and there, still in the same spot where he'd left her, was the white mare. She stood alert, her head high as she watched their approach. When she spotted Willow, she nickered softly, a sound of both relief and inquiry. The foal trotted to her mother, nuzzling her briefly before turning back toward Jack and Martha, who had just reached the clearing. "My God, she's magnificent," Martha breathed, taking in the sight of the injured horse. The mare was indeed striking, larger than an average horse, with powerful shoulders and a proud bearing despite her injury. Her coat gleamed pure white in the muted daylight, her mane and tail flowing like silk in the gentle breeze. But what struck Jack most were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and fixed directly on the humans with unmistakable wariness. "She's favoring that left front leg badly," Martha observed, keeping her voice low. "Definitely a sprain or strain in the fetlock area. Might be some tendon damage, too." "How do we approach her?" Jack asked, equally quiet. "Slowly," Martha advised. "You go first. She's seen you before. I'll stay back until she's more comfortable." Jack nodded and began walking toward the mare, his movements deliberately smooth and non-threatening. Willow, seeming to understand his intent, walked beside him, occasionally glancing back at her mother as if to reassure her. The mare watched their approach, ears flicking nervously but making no move to retreat, whether from trust or inability, Jack couldn't tell. When they were about 15 feet away, Jack stopped, remembering how the mare had reacted the previous day. This was her comfort limit before, he explained to Martha, who remained several yards behind him. "Talk to her," Martha suggested. "Let her get used to your voice again." Jack felt slightly self-conscious, but began speaking in the same gentle tone he'd used with Willow. "Hey there, beautiful. Remember me? I brought help for your leg. We want to get you somewhere safe before the storm hits." The mare's ears swiveled, focusing on his voice. Willow moved forward back to her mother's side and then, to Jack's amazement, returned to him, creating a physical bridge between human and horse. "Well, I'll be damned," Martha murmured from behind him. "That foal is vouching for you." Encouraged, Jack took a few steps closer. The mare tensed but didn't back away. Willow remained between them, seemingly mediating this fragile trust. "Martha knows about horses," Jack continued his one-sided conversation. "She can help with your leg. Then you and Willow can stay somewhere safe until you heal." The mare snorted softly, shifting her weight. When she moved, Jack could see the swelling in her fetlock more clearly, an angry bulge that looked painful even from a distance. "We've got a problem," Martha said, coming up slowly beside Jack. "Look at the sky." Jack glanced up to see the clouds had darkened dramatically. The wind had picked up too, carrying the first few snowflakes of the approaching storm. "It's moving faster than I expected," Martha said grimly. "We've got maybe 2 hours before it hits full force, not the 6 I estimated." Jack looked at the injured mare, then at the considerable distance they'd have to travel to reach the UTV and trailer. "Can we make it in time?" Martha's expression was grim. "Only if we can get her moving right now, and even then it'll be close." The mare, as if sensing their urgency, shifted again and took a tentative step, wincing visibly when she put slight weight on her injured leg. "We need to support that leg somehow," Martha said, reaching into her pack. She pulled out a roll of elastic bandage and a small jar. "This is a liniment I make myself. Helps with swelling and pain. If we can wrap her leg, it might give her enough support to move." "Will she let us touch her?" Jack asked. Martha looked at Willow, then at the mare. "That depends on how much she trusts you, and how smart she is about her own survival." Jack looked at Willow, then at her injured mother. The trust he'd built with the foal wouldn't automatically extend to the mare, yet they had no choice but to try. The darkening sky made that clear. "Let me approach first," Jack said quietly. "She's at least seen me before." Martha nodded, handing him the bandage and liniment. "Move slow. No sudden movements. Keep talking so she gets used to your voice." Jack took a deep breath and began walking toward the mare, speaking in the same gentle tone he'd used before. "Hey there, beautiful. We need to help that leg of yours. The storm's coming, and we need to get you somewhere safe." The mare's ears flicked back and forth, her body tensing as Jack approached. When he was about 10 feet away, she shifted her weight, preparing to move despite her injury. Jack stopped. "Willow," he called softly. "Can you help me out here?" As if understanding his request, the foal trotted to her mother's side, nuzzling her briefly before moving to stand between them again, creating that same bridge of trust. The mare nickered softly to her foal, and Willow responded with a gentle whiny. "Are they talking to each other?" Jack whispered over his shoulder to Martha. "In their way," Martha replied. "Horses communicate more than most people realize." Emboldened by Willow's intervention, Jack took another step forward. The mare's muscles bunched, but she remained in place, her dark eyes fixed on him with what seemed like cautious assessment rather than outright fear. "That's it," Jack encouraged. "I just want to help your leg, then we can get you and Willow somewhere warm before the storm hits." Another step, and another. Jack was now close enough to reach out and touch the mare if he dared. Willow remained beside him, occasionally glancing between Jack and her mother as if facilitating this tenuous connection. "I'm going to touch your leg now," Jack said, slowly crouching down. "This might help the pain." He extended his hand, moving with exaggerated slowness. The mare snorted, shifting her weight, but didn't pull away. Jack held his breath as his fingers made contact with her leg, just above the swollen fetlock. The mare flinched but didn't kick or bolt, a small miracle in itself. Jack gently applied the liniment Martha had given him, massaging it into the swollen joint with careful pressure. The mare's muscles trembled beneath his touch, but she tolerated the contact. "That's amazing," Martha said from behind him. "I've never seen a wild horse accept human touch so quickly." Jack didn't respond, focusing entirely on the injured leg. Once he'd applied the liniment thoroughly, he began wrapping the elastic bandage around the fetlock, providing support without restricting movement. "There," he said, securing the end of the bandage. "That should help." He stood slowly, not wanting to startle the mare with sudden movement. To his amazement, she lowered her head and nudged his shoulder gently, not quite affection, but something like acknowledgement. "Good girl," Jack said, tentatively raising his hand to stroke her neck. She allowed the touch, though her muscles remained tense. Martha approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "We need to get moving. That storm's picking up fast." Jack nodded, looking at the considerable distance they needed to travel. "Can she make it to the UTV?" "She'll have to," Martha said grimly, "but we'll need to lead her, and we don't have a halter." Jack thought for a moment, then unwound his scarf, one of the items Martha had given him from her cabin. "Will this work?" Martha nodded approvingly. "Might do in a pinch." With careful movements, Jack fashioned the scarf into a makeshift halter, slipping it over the mare's head. She accepted this with surprising docility, though Jack suspected it had more to do with her injury and Willow's presence than any genuine trust in humans. "Okay," Jack said, holding the end of the scarf. "Let's try this." He gave a gentle tug, and the mare took a tentative step forward, testing her weight on the bandaged leg. She winced visibly, but took another step, then another. "The linament's helping with the pain," Martha observed, "but we need to move carefully. Too much stress on that leg could make the injury worse." They set off through the forest, Jack leading the mare while Willow trotted alongside. Martha went ahead, clearing the path of fallen branches and identifying the easiest route through the snow. The going was slow, much slower than Jack had hoped. The mare moved stiffly, each step on her injured leg clearly painful despite the bandage and liniment. The wind had picked up, driving snowflakes sideways through the trees. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Jack could see his breath forming thick clouds in the increasingly frigid air. "Storm's moving in faster than I expected," Martha called back, her voice nearly lost in a sudden gust of wind. "We need to pick up the pace if possible." Jack looked at the laboring mare. "I don't think she can go any faster without risking more damage." Martha stopped, turning to assess their situation. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "You're right. We push her too hard, she might break down completely, but that means we might not make it back before the worst of the storm hits." "What do we do?" Jack asked, the seriousness of their situation sinking in. They were miles from Martha's cabin, with an injured horse, a foal, and a blizzard bearing down on them. Martha's weathered face was grim as she surveyed the darkening sky. "There's an old trapper's cabin about half a mile east of here. It's not much, but it might shelter us until the storm passes." Is it closer than the UTV? Yes, and in this weather, shelter is more important than transportation. Martha adjusted her pack. The UTV has emergency supplies. We can hole up in the cabin and wait out the worst of it. As they changed course toward the trapper's cabin, the snow began falling more heavily. The wind cut through Jack's layers, and he could only imagine how cold the horses must be. Despite their thick winter coats, the mare continued her labored progress through the deepening snow, her head lowered against the wind. Willow stayed close to her mother's side, occasionally nudging her as if encouraging her to keep moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Martha pointed ahead. There it is. Through the curtain of snow, Jack could make out a small, dilapidated structure, little more than a shack, with a sagging roof and walls made of rough-hewn logs. It wasn't much, but right now it looked like salvation. Just a little further, Jack encouraged the mare, who was moving more slowly with each passing minute. They reached the cabin as the storm intensified into a full blizzard. The wind howled around them and visibility had dropped to mere feet. Martha pushed open the cabin's weathered door, which creaked in protest. The horses won't fit inside, Jack realized, looking at the tiny interior. No, Martha agreed, but there's a lean-to on the back that might give them some protection from the wind. They led the mare and Willow around to the back of the cabin, where a crude shelter extended from the main structure. It was open on one side but would block the worst of the wind and snow. It's not ideal, Martha said, but it's better than nothing. Let's get them settled, then see what we can do about making this place habitable for us. Inside the trapper's cabin, Martha busied herself with making the space habitable while Jack settled the horses in the lean-to. The cabin's interior was small and dusty, with cobwebs hanging from the low ceiling and a musty smell that spoke of long abandonment. A rusty wood stove stood in one corner and a narrow cot with a threadbare mattress occupied another. Been a few years since anyone used this place, Martha said, sweeping dust from a small table with her gloved hand. But the roof looked solid enough. Jack returned from the lean-to, stamping snow from his boots. The horses are as comfortable as I can make them. I cleared the snow and put down some pine boughs for bedding. Martha nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Now let's see about getting this stove working. The stove was their priority. Without heat, they wouldn't survive the night as temperatures plummeted. Martha examined the rusted chimney pipe while Jack searched for anything that might serve as fuel. He found a small stack of ancient firewood under a tarp in the corner, dry enough to burn despite its age. Lucky break, Martha commented as Jack loaded the stove. Trapper who built this place was thorough. As Martha coaxed the fire to life, Jack returned to check on the horses. The wind howled around the cabin, driving snow through the trees with frightening intensity. In the lean-to, the mare had lain down on the pine boughs, her injured leg extended awkwardly before her. Willow stood protectively nearby, watching Jack with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should. "How is she?" Martha asked when Jack returned, his face stiff with cold. "Not good," he admitted. "Lying down now, which could be just exhaustion, but..." Martha's expression grew serious. "Horses don't usually lie down unless they feel safe or they're in significant pain. Given the circumstances, I'm guessing it's the latter." The stove was beginning to radiate heat, fighting back the chill that had settled in the cabin's corners. Martha unpacked what supplies they had: a thermos of coffee, some jerky, a few energy bars, and a small first aid kit. "Not exactly a feast," she said, handing Jack a cup of coffee, "but it'll keep us going." They ate in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Jack's thoughts kept returning to the injured mare and her foal. "Will she be okay until morning?" he asked finally. Martha sighed. "Hard to say. Leg injuries in horses can go bad quickly. If she can't walk tomorrow..." She left the sentence unfinished, but Jack understood the implication. "We can't just leave her," he said, more forcefully than he'd intended. "No one's suggesting that," Martha replied calmly, "but we need to be realistic about our options if she can't move under her own power. We're miles from help, in dangerous terrain, with limited supplies." Jack knew she was right, but the thought of abandoning the mare after everything that had happened seemed unthinkable. "There has to be something else we can do." Martha studied him over her coffee cup. "You've really connected with these horses, haven't you?" "I don't know how to explain it," Jack admitted. "When I found them, I was just trying to survive myself, but then Willow trusted me, followed me to find help." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It sounds crazy." "Not crazy," Martha said thoughtfully. "Uncommon, maybe. These mountain horses don't usually bond with humans. They're too wild, too wary, but sometimes circumstances create unlikely connections." As they talked, the wind outside intensified, rattling the cabin's single window. The storm was reaching its peak, transforming the world outside into a howling void of white. "I'm going to check on them again," Jack said, pulling on his coat. "Be careful," Martha warned. "Easy to get disoriented in a whiteout, even a few steps from shelter." Jack tied a length of rope from his pack to the cabin door, creating a lifeline to follow back. Even with this precaution, the few steps to the lean-to were harrowing, the wind threatening to knock him off his feet, the snow so thick he could barely see his hand before his face. In the relative shelter of the lean-to, he found the mare still lying down, her breathing labored. Willow stood over her protectively, but moved aside as Jack approached. He knelt beside the injured horse, gently examining her leg. The bandage had slipped, and the fetlock looked worse, more swollen, warmer to the touch. "We need to rewrap this," he murmured, carefully removing the old bandage. To his surprise, the mare didn't resist, watching him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand his intentions. Jack reapplied what remained of Martha's liniment and rewrapped the leg with fresh bandage from the first aid kit. When he finished, the mare nickered softly, a sound Jack interpreted as gratitude, though he knew he might be anthropomorphizing. Willow nudged his shoulder gently, reinforcing the sense of connection between them. "I'm trying," Jack told them, his voice barely audible above the storm. "We'll get you somewhere safe, I promise." Back in the cabin, Martha had managed to make the place almost cozy. The fire in the stove burned steadily, and she'd hung their wet outer layers nearby to dry. "How are they?" she asked as Jack stamped snow from his boots. "The mare's leg is worse," he reported grimly. "I rewrapped it, but she's still down." Martha nodded, her expression serious. "If she can't get up by morning, we'll have some hard decisions to make." They fell silent, listening to the storm. Eventually, exhaustion overcame them, and they took turns sleeping, one watching the fire while the other rested on the narrow cot. Sometime in the early hours, the storm's fury began to abate. The howling wind gradually subsided to a whisper, and the heavy snowfall lightened to occasional flurries. By dawn, an eerie silence had fallen over the forest, broken only by the occasional sound of snow falling from overburdened branches. Jack, who had taken the last watch, stepped outside to check on the horses. The world had been transformed into a crystalline wonderland, every surface coated in white. The sky above was clearing, patches of blue visible between retreating clouds. In the lean-to, his heart sank as he saw the mare still lying down, her breathing shallow. Willow stood nearby, watching him approach with what seemed like expectation. "Hey, girl," Jack said softly, kneeling beside the mare. "We need to get moving soon. Do you think you can stand?" As if understanding his words, the mare struggled to rise, her legs splaying awkwardly in the soft bedding of pine boughs. Jack moved to help, supporting her shoulder as best he could. With a tremendous effort, she managed to get her front legs under her, then her back legs until she stood trembling but upright. "That's it," Jack encouraged, steadying her with gentle hands. "Good girl." The mare tested her injured leg, putting just a hint of weight on it before drawing back in pain, but she was standing. That was something. Martha appeared at the entrance to the lean-to, her expression brightening when she saw the mare on her feet. Well, that's a good sign at least. She can't put much weight on the leg, Jack cautioned, but she's trying. Martha assessed the situation with practical eyes. The snow's deep, but the storm's past. If we can get her to the UTV and trailer, we might make it back to my place by nightfall. Jack nodded, stroking the mare's neck. Hear that? Just a little further, then you can rest properly. The mare turned her head toward him, her eyes meeting his with what seemed like determination. Beside her, Willow pranced in the fresh snow, her youthful energy undimmed by their ordeal. Let's get our gear together, Martha said. Daylight's precious this time of year. They set out from the trapper's cabin under a sky that had cleared to a brilliant blue. The world around them sparkled with fresh snow, pristine and untouched except for the occasional track of a small animal. Despite the beauty, Jack knew they faced a challenging journey. The mare could barely walk, and the snow was deep enough to make every step laborious. We need to take it slow, Martha advised as Jack led the mare from the lean-to. Push her too hard and that leg might give out completely. Jack nodded, keeping a gentle tension on the makeshift halter. The mare moved cautiously, her injured leg barely touching the ground. Willow stayed close to her mother's side, occasionally looking back at Jack, as if seeking reassurance. Their progress was painfully slow. What would have been a 40-minute walk under normal conditions stretched into hours as they carefully picked their way through the snow-laden forest. Martha went ahead, breaking trail to make the path easier for the horses. By midday, they had covered less than half the distance to the UTV. The mare was tiring visibly, her head drooping and her steps becoming more hesitant. During a brief rest, Martha pulled Jack aside. She's fading, she said quietly, nodding toward the injured horse. I'm not sure she'll make it much further. Jack's heart sank as he looked at the mare. Her white coat was darkened with sweat despite the cold, and her breathing was labored. What can we do? Martha sighed, her breath forming a cloud in the cold air. I could go ahead, get the UTV as close as possible, but even then, she left the thought unfinished. As they discussed their options, Willow suddenly raised her head, ears pricked forward. She stared intently into the forest, then began pawing at the snow, nickering softly. What is it? Jack asked, following her gaze but seeing nothing unusual. Martha had gone still, her head tilted as she listened. I hear something, she said after a moment. An engine, I think. Now Jack heard it too, the distant rumble of a motor, growing gradually louder. Someone else was out in the forest, perhaps another person with a snowmobile or UTV. Hello, Martha called, her voice carrying through the clear winter air. Over here. The engine sound changed direction, heading toward them. Minutes later, a snowmobile appeared through the trees, driven by a man bundled in winter gear. He cut the engine, lifting his goggles to reveal a weathered face and curious eyes. Martha, he said in surprise, what in the world are you doing out here after that storm? Tom Fletcher, Martha said with evident relief. Never thought I'd be glad to see a game warden in these parts. Tom dismounted, taking in the scene. Martha and Jack, the injured mare, the foal watching them all with alert interest. Looks like you've got quite a situation here. Martha quickly explained their predicament. The injured horse, their shelter during the storm, and the UTV waiting half a mile away. Tom nodded thoughtfully. I can help. Got my heavy-duty sled attached to the snowmobile. Usually use it for supplies, but it might work for your horse if we can get her to lie down on it. Will it support her weight? Jack asked. It's carried elk before, Tom replied, but getting her onto it will be the challenge. They discussed the logistics, how to coax a wild, injured horse onto an unfamiliar sled, how to keep her calm during transport, how to reunite her with the UTV and trailer. Throughout their conversation, Willow had been watching intently, her ears flicking back and forth as if following their words. Now, to everyone's surprise, she approached the snowmobile and sled, sniffing them cautiously before turning to look at her mother. "She's investigating," Martha said softly. "Smart little thing." What happened next left them all speechless. Willow walked to her mother's side, then deliberately lay down in the snow beside her, as if demonstrating what needed to happen. She stayed down for a moment, then rose and walked to the sled, looking back expectantly. "I'll be damned," Tom muttered. "Is she showing her mother what to do?" "Impossible," Martha said, but her tone lacked conviction. Jack, who had spent the most time with Willow, wasn't so sure. "She's been surprising me since I found them. Maybe she understands more than we think." Whether by incredible coincidence or genuine understanding, Willow's demonstration seemed to have an effect. When they approached the mare with the sled, she showed less resistance than expected. With gentle coaxing and Tom's experienced handling, they managed to get her to lie down on the reinforced canvas surface. "Easy now," Tom soothed as Jack secured the mare with ropes to prevent her from falling off during transport. "That's it, girl." Willow watched the entire process, occasionally nickering what sounded like encouragement to her mother. Once the mare was secured, the Foal positioned herself alongside the sled, as if prepared to escort her mother. "Never seen anything like it," Tom said, shaking his head in wonder. "These mountain horses are something else." With the mare safely loaded, Tom started the snowmobile, keeping the engine at its lowest setting to minimize frightening the horses. The sled slid smoothly over the snow as they began moving toward the UTV. Jack walked alongside, ready to intervene if the mare panicked. But she remained remarkably calm, perhaps too exhausted to resist. Willow stayed close, trotting alongside the sled, her eyes never leaving her mother. Her presence seemed to keep the mare calm, a silent reassurance that transcended species barriers. When they reached the UTV and trailer, the real challenge began, transferring the injured mare from the sled into the trailer. Tom's experience with wildlife proved invaluable as he directed their efforts. "Slow and steady," he advised. "Let her set the pace as much as possible." With considerable effort and no small amount of coaxing, they managed to get the mare into the trailer. She stood trembling from exertion, her injured leg barely touching the floor. "We should get moving," Martha said, checking the sky. "Still a few hours of daylight left, but I don't want to be out here if temperatures drop again." Tom agreed to follow them back to Martha's cabin on his snowmobile, providing an extra measure of security in case they encountered difficulties. With Willow secured in the trailer alongside her mother, they set off through the snow-covered forest. The journey back to Martha's cabin took over 2 hours, the UTV moving carefully over the difficult terrain. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. "Let's get her into the barn," Martha directed, backing the trailer up to a small but well-built structure behind her cabin. Inside, fresh hay and a sheltered stall awaited the injured mare. With Tom's help, they carefully unloaded her, supporting her weight as she hobbled into the stall. Willow followed, staying close to her mother as she settled onto the soft bedding. "She needs a vet," Martha said, examining the injured leg in the better light of the barn. "But we've done what we can for now. The leg's still swollen, but I don't think there's permanent damage." Jack watched the 2 horses, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment despite his exhaustion. "Will they be okay here?" Martha nodded. "I can call the large animal vet tomorrow if the weather holds. She'll need time to heal, but she's got shelter, food, and her baby with her. That's more than she would have had out there." As they left the barn, Tom shook Jack's hand firmly. "Quite the adventure for a city photographer," he said with a smile. Not many can say they've rescued wild mountain horses during a blizzard. Inside Martha's warm cabin, over steaming mugs of coffee and a hearty stew, they recounted their experiences. Tom shared what he knew about the mountain horses, their history, their elusiveness, their reputation among locals. They're special animals, he confirmed. Protected too, it's illegal to capture them ordinarily, but medical necessity makes this an exception. What happens when she heals? Jack asked, thinking of Willow and her mother returning to the wild. Martha considered this. That's up to them, I suppose. The barn door will always be open once she's recovered. They can stay or go as they choose. Later that evening, Jack made one final visit to the barn. The mare was resting comfortably on the straw, her injured leg properly bandaged with veterinary supplies from Martha's extensive first aid kit. Willow stood nearby, watching Jack enter with those intelligent eyes that had captured his heart from the beginning. "You're quite the remarkable pair," Jack said softly, stroking Willow's neck. "Thank you for trusting me." As if understanding his words, Willow pressed her head against his chest in a gesture that felt remarkably like gratitude. In that moment, Jack knew that whatever path his life took from here, it had been irrevocably changed by a snowstorm and the extraordinary bond formed with a wild mountain horse and her foal.